was in 2008 when an invitation attracted my attention. It was a picture you can see here. It was a snapshot, quite dilettantic, from an angle that destroyed all proportions of the depicted machine, an irreversible rundown machine. You can see the shadows of the flashlight and the dark background. It was a really bad photograph. Ill thought was written on the machine, and I supposed it was a broken developer machine from the 80s. The bowls pulled out, dirty, shitted by birds, so really not in use anymore. And I got curious, what is it going to be, what will it represent? It announced an exhibition of two Austrian artists, Pascal Petignan and Martin Scholz-Jakschus, and the title of the exhibition revealed more. It said, "The Last Laboratory." I went there and the exhibition kept what it was promising after entering the first room through a light lock, and it was a rather dark room in the court and backyard. And the first impression was a total mess, chaos, huge sinks, piles of sinks covered the floor, consisting of remains from darkroom equipment and objects of daily use. Piles of papers that remained from roll films, empty chemistry bottles, film spools, rejected photographs with stains and test stripes and packagings. You found yourself in the middle of a great mess. Additionally, it happened that I was alone there, and somehow like in a closed down factory where you enter without any permission, and stuff was still lying there that nobody was missing. Petignan and Scholz demonstrated the ruins of analog photography, and I remember two feelings I had at the same time: sympathy and disgust. So on the one hand, amazement about the authenticity I was surrounded with, those many fallouts of photography, and they seemed to me like fallouts from a performance. And I admit I couldn't resist taking one of these pieces with me. But at the same time, I had the feeling of relief that photography will go on without chemistry in the future, and that the world will have one waste dump less. Petignan Scholz had also set up a darkroom, showing film scenes on darkrooms, and I was surprised again that the developer machine was plugged in during the exhibition and de facto still made some strange noise, some movement in its inner dysfunctional body. I felt like being thrown into an apocalyptic scenario. The story behind this exhibition was, from 2005 on, Petignan and Scholz, who were also running a school in Vienna for photography, they got many requests from people who had to or who wanted to quit their darkrooms. And they got a lot of stuff, great stuff, as well as damaged devices, and they saw a lot of closing downs of darkrooms, private and commercial ones. And they collected whatever they thought they could be useful ones. Naturally, these requests increased their awareness that darkrooms get rare, that the future of photography is without chemistry. And the artists have anticipated what has not taken place yet, but is a future fact. So this last laboratory has really stayed strongly in my mind because it was exploring the photographic in an unusual way with a real radical gesture. I've always been interested in media reflections, in this approach to photography that has its origins in conceptual photography of the 1960s, when self-reflexivity was explored and artists drew attention to a number of photographic characteristics. Depicting details from the process has become a common topic still in use nowadays, like letzte black and white, Kodak from 2003, that bears the characteristic mask of a negative film strip. The work addresses the elementary formal and technical features of analog photography, such as image formats, the effects of masking, the immediacy of photograms, as well as the extreme ends of the color scale, black and white. Moving up closer, we discover a charming detail, because the material code is Kodak 160 NC, is written on the mask, draws attention to the film's ability to render natural colors, NC, natural colors. In this case, it is a characteristic that has very little relevance for this all white, black and white monochrome. But in my opinion, this kind of work of art just was in the heritage of conceptual art, reflections on the requirements and conditions. But after having seen the last laboratory, I realized that the driving force behind this occupation was another. These parameters have become important topics because analog techniques and materials had started to fall by the wayside, only to be replaced by digital storage devices. And I realized that I'm part of this very last generation that is not a digital native. And in this regard, I was really lucky because I grew up with liquid light, and I had to close the door of the cabinet when my father was preparing his film holders, because in the cabinet under his trousers was the only really dark place in our house. And at the same time, 2007 till 2010, newspapers announced that companies like Polaroid and Kodak successively stopped producing film materials. Polaroid stopped making cameras in 2007, selling film after 2009. Ilford was discontinuing favorite paper stocks. Costumers who wanted to buy Ilfochromes, for example, had to place their last orders until November 2011. Kodak announced the same year that it would stop producing its iconic Kodachrome film after nearly 75 years in production. And so 2010, the last lab in Kansas for Kodachromes closed down. Michael Mauracher at this place recently showed a piece on that in Vienna. He was filming Paul Simon's song, Kodachrome, and the nice bright colors of this legendary film with 3 different Kodachrome movie films, and they had different dates of expiry. The first was 1984 and the others 1997. So as you can see, the eldest has already lost its nice bright colors. And Kodak, from Michael Mauracher, the Kodachrome is a kind of closed circuit, because he was filming the song Kodachrome on Kodachrome. And the idea is a little similar to Tati Tadin's film on Kodak. This film was chronicling the last days of the production of Kodak in the Kodak French film factory in Chalon-sur-Saône, and she was filming it also with a 35mm Kodak film. At the same time, together with this news, a reflection on the processes and materials that are essential to analog photography has spread and has continued until today. So-called last prints appeared, or the last large Polaroids, the last Ilfochromes. Reflections on conceptual photography now have an additional aspect, the loss of analog process. And the key topics, they are still the same or similar, but the moving power is another. The moving power is this future loss. And one word has been stressed more and more, it's the analog. So the last laboratory has been only one example that has defined the analog as a new motif. And I paid more attention from now on to how the analog is manifest in actual art productions. It's young artists on that topic. They feel that they have a last chance to get into contact with analog photography or to anticipate in this praxis, like Philipp Goldbach. He's interested in the formal conditions, the masks and the scales. He's interpreting the enlargement of an overexposed transparency sheet film as a sculpture, in this case enamel on plexiglass. Elder artists who have found their favorite material, they used it as long as it was possible, like Inge Dick, who was working with Polaroid for years until the production film was stopped in 2006. The artists realized that their materials will disappear and started to materialize the vanishing. Thomas Linden, for example, again in 2008, he piled fixing salt that is used as a fixative in the darkroom, and photographed this white crystal pile in front of a black backdrop and entitled it Light Resistant. It is what we call a straight photography, staged in black and white and printed as a black and white silver gelatine print on barit. It is a tribute to Sir John Herschel, who was the one who already knew in 1819 that natrium thiosulfate is able to dissolve silver salt, and it is still in use today. So what Thomas Linden did was he teases an image out of the medium that reflects one of its very origins. It's a tribute to the invention of photography when it was still a challenge to preserve the photographic image. And the artist had found a way to visualize what is essential but normally invisible. Usually prefabricated chemicals are used, and here I get back once more to Pettignon-Scholz. Their so-called series chemical units is about commonly used darkroom products. It's plastic jugs with chemicals for the black and white lab. Developers such as Rodinal or baths such as Hypo-Eliminator to remove the fixer solution. Their significance for the area of black and white photography and for chemical reproduction in general is obvious. Since these tools are from the area of reproduction, the artists also selected the duplication as a theme, because before the photographic print, they made the physical print by puring silicone casts on the original jugs and making plaster models out of them. These were then photographed in the studio on 5 by 7 inch color negatives, and in the plaster model, the original size of the jugs, of course, they remain preserved, whereas in the print, the dimensions are enlarged to 121 by 168. So the artist's approach is to focus on very simple things taken from spitting distance, simple stage, not very emotional, but nevertheless they change the status of these objects of everyday use, because now they are objects that are worth to be depicted. Essential parts of the process, like industrial things, filters, developer trays, timer, darkroom lamps, gray cards, and they are formally adapted, often separated from its surroundings, reality, and from its function. Articles of daily use become erratic and symbolic objects. Together with them, the darkroom itself is a subject of special interest. It's a lot of them. You have Christopher Williams, staged one in the Fachhochschule Aachen, or Adam Bartosz. He visited different darkrooms in New York. Robert Burley focused on commercial labs and Kodak factories, or Ernst Koslitz, the Viennese artist, the place of growing against developing with his plants in the developer trays. So the dark room itself is a room of exceptional circumstances with its red light conditions that refer to the light-sensible materials. The dark room is presented as the site of experimenting with details, size and contrast. Different protagonists of analog photography meet there, like time, light and fluids. The space in which the photo develops, in which it is exposed and fixed again, withdraws from representation. Depicting it requires what it excludes, light. Georg Schöllhammer was writing this on Werner Kaligowski's darkroom from 1999, and Werner Kaligowski recalls, the darkroom was too dark. I didn't want day for night, so I chose an additional light, but it still took 3 hours to expose the positive. Others, like John Sayer, visited colleagues to photograph their developer trays, again with very simple documentary methods, most of them in natural light, not mystified, not romanticized. He produces them systematically, one after the other, in the same way, frontal, black background, out of function at the moment, and with a lot of history inscribed in them. And a kind of very special edition I got from Marie Gimpel in her contribution to an exhibition that I realized 2012 in Leipzig. She recorded the sounds of the laboratories at the university, having that very special moment in her mind when images appear out of the darkness. So no image without darkness. She built a dark box that encapsulated the visitor from the exhibition and picked him up to follow her to the dark room. All these tributes to the analog are also tributes to the handicraft, to the hours spent in the dark room and the material aspect of the medium. It's a homage to the tangible. Nevertheless, we cannot neglect a certain fetishism, a certain desire. All those objects are already cult objects. You can see the traces of time. You can study the designs of vintage film systems, the flair of ancient letters and cardboard boxes with their corners already damaged, like in Matthias Hermann's new still lifes for the first issue of the magazine Streulicht. Or more abstract, the black cardboard box that protects Kodak photo paper from light. It has a characteristic hairy surface that Tamara Horakova has used for her Rochester cat. And in her mind was that darkness is a necessity and shooting the box is an act of destroying. In the exhibition recently in Vienna, you had the 2 digital images on Hanemühlen paper with a similar soft, smooth surface, and they were hanging one upon the other. So artists react on this embodiment with a special emphasis on materiality. They react on the mass of images with single prints and originals, and they react on the cheap inkjet print with the vintage print and the buried paper, and they react on speed with slowness. Photography has become bodiless in its everyday use. Circulation is its aim. And here I also have stressed Walter Benjamin. I think that Walter Benjamin's, when Walter Benjamin's opponent was the reproduction of pictures, ours is the circulation of immaterial images. And I think aura was regained by analog photography long ago. John Mitchell has noticed one thing that is enlightening in this matter, the difference between image and picture. He asks, what is the difference between image and picture? And it's a common sense, you can hang a picture, but you can't hang an image. A picture is a physical object, something you can burn or break, whereas an image is something that appears out of a picture. And dealing myself with images often means to reflect only on the image, on their iconography, on their content or their composition. But photographers always think in terms of pictures. They have to handle their equipment, they have to handle their films, the camera, the development, the prints, the presentation and so on. They have to deal with exposure and dust and scratches. Like James Welling has used his underdeveloped negatives from the very early 80s without retouching, dust, black dust included, like you can see here, these spots. Because they are part of the analog universe. Artists have to deal with different types of films, like here from Michael Schuster in the first column, you can see the original packages, then Konica, Agfa, Fuji and Kodak with the differences in reproducing colors. Artists have to deal with grey cards, like here Anne Manfredi, grey self-portrait with grey card and toothache, or they deal with colors like the Kodak yellow here from Christopher Williams. Artists are confronted with mistakes during the development process, like Philipp Goldbach again. He's imitating here the colors of emulsion in different stages, again realized as sculptures after 4 by 5 inch sheet films. For Steffen Junkans, he chose the topic of the upside down. For users of analog large-scale cameras, it's a quite normal view. And of course, they have to deal with the grain, like Tim Lee is showing here hands holding up an old Leica model in a very grainy image. A tribute to Alexander Rodchenko and his points of view. A tight relation between photographer and medium is obvious. The tendency towards technical knowledge and details is visible. Recently I got this really exact chronicle from Jim Welling, where he wrote down every step that was necessary for his results. We know those long titles. Jim Welling does not use them as titles, but we know it from Christopher Williams again. He's one of these central players in this field. For example, with this really elaborate series of handling, which also includes that haptic has to do with hand. What he does is, like in a user manual, we can see hands manipulating an Exacta camera. The 2 images on the right I added just to remember what the images look like that usually illustrate such manuals. And Williams hired a hand model to demonstrate how to handle the Exacta Varex 2A, built in Dresden in the early 1960s. The most unusual feature of Exacta cameras is undoubtedly the placement of shutter release and other important components on the left-hand side of the camera body. Williams uses only left hand for these images. And I remember very clearly seeing these awesome results for the first time. Really large scale prints depicting the subjects in an amazing sharpness. Not amazing in respect to Christopher Williams, but in comparison to other images. But this amazing richness of details is responsible for a nearly unpleasant presence of the fingers and their nails and the skin and the birthmark, such as seen by the help of a microscope. But it's common knowledge again that Williams always interrupts the cleanness of his photos to avoid that they look like commercial prints. Preparing the act of photographing by hand is of the same importance for the analog process as holding a printed picture in hand, not just watching it on a display. And Tatiana Lecomte is referring to this in a slide project when laying them out, before us, one picture after the other picture. As in Jean-Luc Godard's Le Carabinière, the image become a form of evidence that is authenticated by the commentator's hand. In Le Carabinière, the two soldiers come over, they've brought a pile of photographs with them, and they show it to their girlfriends and laying down one after the other. It seems the future generations won't be used anymore to hold photographs in their hands. Either they store them on files or print them in photo books. What will happen to the album? Will we remember it by the means of novels like Günter Grass' Blechtrommel, when Oscar is telling his story while watching the album and finding himself as the boy who had decided to stop growing on his 3rd birthday? This homage to the analog that is going on at the moment is driven by a certain solidarity or loyalty or maybe responsibility for a medium whose roots are cropped step by step. Artists write and edit manifestos like Citadine, or recently in Vienna, film from Grella, they did manifests on analog movie films, and many of their colleagues with them. The analog is haptic and authentic. It is the umbilical between the referent and the image. A film negative has a different presence than a JPEG. You can destroy it, you can cut it or damage it chemically. A JPEG you can just delete. Artists don't have the economic power to stop that analog technique vanishes, but photography has always been responsible for recording the ephemeral. So in this case, it's recording its own changes. Critically seen, one could claim a kind of superiority within these pictures. The examples we saw are different from other photographs because they do not report on life or anything trivial, but they report on something special, like on photography. Because someday they might have a historical relevance. Superiority also regarding that these artists have a special knowing that differs them from other authors. They withdraw to a terrain that undoubtedly has a certain relevance and is therefore kind of untouchable. But this homage to the analog is taking place right now before our faces, and the central concerns for the medium today is the fact that it occupies two homes, a tangible material world of objects and prints, and a digital world of files and serves, Robin Kelsey claimed. We can watch the word shrinking together with Robert Burley, but the central question remains, how will mankind remember analog photography? Will they know the analog only from cell phone apps that promise vintage photographs with a special flair? They promise charming old-style photographs with light retro effect filters. You can read in the description of these apps, the filters mimic vintage optics and wear and tear, typical for traditional material. Or they call us to replace digital harshness with the graceful charm of classic analog photography. And they recommend add dirt, dust and grain to create a masterpiece. It is irritating to look over the shoulders of teenagers how they proceed with these effects without knowing anything on the original process. But they understand that something is happening to their banal photos when using these filters. So no wonder that Jeff Wall is showing his printing darkroom, his film processing room, and his film room in Tacita Dean's Manifesto on Film, and he entitles them my 3 favorite rooms.